of our functions here. If you'll notice, we have the main administration building out front. If you go out the south door and across the sidewalk over into the three-story building here, which is the astronaut building, back in those days, the astronauts occupied the third floor. Now, my office during the latter phase of the landing on the, well, actually, after Apollo 11, Grumman laid off over 26,000 employees. And at that time, there were PhD scientists out on the streets in Houston selling newspapers to make ends meet while they transitioned to other positions within society. So here we have, my office was on the second floor right over the front entrance in the astronaut building. So I had free reign and direct contact with all of the crew members, good friends. A number of years later, I think it was 1975, on the third floor, directly above where my office was, is where Mr. James Oberg had his office, and met with him numerous times. From there, we can go over, you had the centrifuge building in the back, go on down the street, go to the Lunar Receiving Laboratory. Now, the Lunar Receiving Laboratory became the hub, the center of all the activities of the lunar missions and the returns astronauts, the spacecraft, the rocks, the samples we brought back, all were put in quarantine in the larger portion of the LRL, the Lunar Receiving Laboratory. My office was located right in the middle, room 105, in the Lunar Receiving Laboratory, where I set up the Data and Photo Control Department. As you can see, not only were specimens, crew, flown back to the LRL, you had spacecraft brought in by barge and by train. The astronauts were brought in and the samples were brought into Ellington Air Force Base, and then they were transported over to the LRL, and a number of other activities that directly moved into. Here shows the lunar sample container that was used to keep the samples at a vacuum condition to maintain their purity, and they're being unloaded on the back dock at the Lunar Receiving Laboratory. Now, while I was there, I took over from one of the lead principal investigators, scientist Dr. Jeffrey Warner. Dr. Brian Erb, who was the director of the Lunar Receiving Laboratory, chose to give me a little accommodation and put me to work taking over from Dr. Warner. This particular one was from NASA on the quality of black and white photos. I found that we could do as good a job with black and white as we could, or even better job than with color, and we could save a number of repetitions or different editions of it, and they decided to go along with my recommendation. It saved them quite a lot of money, and actually at that time I moved from Grumman over to the Brown and Root Northrop Corporation, which was a consortium between Brown and Root Corporation and Northrop called BRN, and they had the responsibility of running the Johnson Space Center. And in that capacity, anytime we came up with an idea of cost savings, if it was good, you got a monetary award. The highest award you could receive would be $1,000. And back in 1960, 71, 72, $1,000 was a pretty nice little bonus to have in your check. And I did receive that. Now, Dr. Warner, mind you, I did take over from him. He was a PhD scientist, and I was just a little bachelor's degree individual. Took over from him, and when he left, he chose to say that it was by an order of magnitude better than when he had left it. Again, Dr. Pat Butler, who was an associate curator at the LRL for the sample processing, he chose to make note of the fact that I helped put together not only the Data and Photo Control Department, but produced the Lunar Sample Information Catalog. It's what the principal investigators of lunar material all over the world relied upon to identify the particular sample they were going to receive, as well as requesting photographs. And part of my function was to be sure that they got both the orbital as well as the lunar surface photographs of the orientation of the moon rock that these people were receiving a portion of. Now, fast forwarding a little bit into the Space Shuttle program, I left NASA at about 1973, I believe it was, for about 3 years to go to work in the civilian industry, because every time we finished up part of a program, such as we did with the Apollo, they would lay all of us off, and I chose to try to get into civilian. I did real estate. I worked for Transamerica Corporation. I wound up working on the Aramco Saudi Arabian gasification program as a certified cost engineer. And then they went looking for astronauts again. And since I had the prior experience and had done everything that the astronauts had done, I applied for the astronaut program, and this attests the fact that they did receive my application. I'd asked for some of my associates if they would give me their recommendation for the program. I received a letter from Neil Armstrong recommending me for the program, asked me to recount what activities I did both at the Lunar Receiving Laboratory as well as my activities as a consultant test pilot. Now back at the LRL, when we would receive the photographic data from each mission, it would come in canisters for reels, the 70mm Hasselblads, which Mr. Hoagland will go into more detail, the type of film that they had. It would be processed, and then it would come over to my lab, and I would maintain 5 complete sets. The reason for that is when we had scientists coming in and out, I would have to pull from the files, about 12 different filing cabinets I had set up and arranged so that we could find each sample's photography as well as the other information. And once that information came in, then we could process it. Now, again, this is a close-up of what was actually presented by Dr. Michael Duke, who was the lunar sample curator. Now, he's an important figure because as we got down through Apollo 16, an order came down from headquarters, as I was told, through Dr. Duke, through my lead supervisor, BRN, who was Mr. Bud Lascala, and he came to me and says, "Ken, we need to destroy all of the photographic material that you have except for one set." I asked him, well, wait a minute, this is all the material that we've received. I mean, it's the greatest adventure that mankind has had. Why can't we just donate it to some of the local universities or schools for their science department? It would be invaluable to them. And the answer I got is, no, we were told to destroy it all, get rid of everything except for one set. I don't care how you do it, get rid of it, dump it in the Dempsey dumpster, do what you need to do. Well, I didn't think that was quite the right thing to do. I did throw away 3 sets. I did put a 4th set in a duffel bag, and I took it home. I said, well, I might as well keep a set for myself. I had probably about 1,000 photographs that I had a rightful right to keep. And since it was going to be refuse and trash and thrown away, I just saved them the expense of having to haul it off. All right. This letter, at Oklahoma City University, my alma mater, where I completed my Bachelor of Science degree in Aerospace Engineering, the president of OCU, Dr. Dolphus Whitten, I had numerous occasions to meet with Dr. Whitten and present him with other pictures and material and data. My brother, Dr. A.R. Johnston, who was a NASA engineer, after the Apollo, we made arrangements for the boilerplate number 8 Apollo command module to be donated to the university to be put on display for civilians to come in and see the spacecraft. So we continued having a rather active role with the university, and I still do to this day, as a matter of fact. Now, fast forwarding, or perhaps back to the Apollo 14, which was one of the crucial missions that, as we were working from mission to mission, I mean, we were so pressed on time to meet each one of the scheduled dates to get things done that when we would see something that looked strange, somewhat out of order, and say, wow, that's something's wrong there, and we want to ask questions, but we didn't have time. We were pushed so hard we had to keep going, and then by the time we had time, we all got laid off. Maybe that was the plan. Apollo 14 landed in Falmouth. No, it wasn't. That was Apollo 15, excuse me. Apollo 14. This camera you'll notice on the front of Alan Bean's spacesuit is a Hasselblad, a 70mm Hasselblad camera.